Welcome to the Wheel of Time Diaries. I am your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today is the first episode for Book 11 of the series, Knife of Dreams. And this one's going to be a doozy. Right off the bat, I just want to give a little bit of a timeline estimate for how many diaries or so I think this will take, and or how long I believe these diaries will be being published, because for the last few books in the series, if not the last 4 books, actually. I know at least from Path of Daggers, Winter's Heart, and Crossroads of Twilight, I did each book in 4 diaries, if I'm not mistaken, and that turned out actually working very well just based off of the structure of those, as well as the length of them. Knife of Dreams is a decent bit longer than any of the last 3 books have been. It's even a little bit longer than Book 7 was, and I can't remember if Book 7 was 4 or 5 diaries. I think it was just 4, but a couple of them were very, very long. And based off of some things that I have going on at the time that these videos are publishing in November of 2025, I think that the video schedule with regard to, well, reading and video schedule with regard to my diaries for this are going to be a little bit chaotic. For this first video, we are covering the prologue and the first 3 chapters, because based off of what I could tell, this kind of works out just based off of what is covered. And then next week on the 13th, diary number 2, I believe I'm probably going to cover up through chapters 4 through 13 or so. There's a chance that I only go through like chapter 12 or something. I forget what some of the POV lineup is a little bit in there, but just based off of storylines, I think I'm going to have a fairly hefty diary next week, but the diary after that, the third one on the 20th, is going to be really short, or at least it's not going to be covering that much, only a handful of chapters, and that is because of going on nearly a week long trip across the country, and based off of the timing of my reading the book as well as my ability to make videos, I'm probably going to have to make the second and third diaries at once. So I'm going to have to get through a pretty hefty chunk of the book so that I can split that up into 2 smaller portions for the next couple weeks. I'm still undecided at this point whether I'm going to release a diary on Thanksgiving, because that would be a little bit strange. And based off of the length of the book, I'm pretty sure this will take at least 5 diaries, if not 6. So basically, expect for these to go essentially through the end of December. Maybe if you skip Thanksgiving and skip Christmas, the other 6 Thursdays from now through the end of the year are probably going to be covered by Knife of Dreams. I don't know exactly what that looks like in terms of where the cutoffs for what I talk about each week are, of course, but for the moment, that is kind of what I have planned in my head. But with that said, let's talk about some of my early impressions, my first impressions of Knife of Dreams. Like I said, we are covering the prologue and the first 3 chapters, and for the most part, basically kind of what I was expecting the book to start out with when I finished Crossroads of Twilight, based off of what happened at the very end of Crossroads of Twilight, specifically with Egwene's POV. I kind of expected for Knife of Dreams to basically open up with that same storyline, because it was kind of open in the way that Jordan doesn't typically do, just to not follow up on. I know he does some weird structural things sometimes, but I was pretty confident that Egwene's storyline, or general like kind of White Tower stuff, is what would be going on in the early portion of this book. That seems to be about correct. That's basically all that happened in here, was basically just the material relevant to that. Where I am now, currently at the time of recording, just about to start chapter 4, moves into a Perrin POV. I don't know off the top of my head how long this goes. I think it's about 2 chapters based off of my skimming, but then a pretty significant chunk of the book after that is a different POV. So basically that's what we're covering, is just this very first early portion of the book. What did I think of everything so far? Well, the prologue was solid. It is the longest prologue of the series, and in some moments it didn't fully feel like a prologue, but I gotta say, all of the content that was to be found in here was pretty solid. And then the first 3 chapters were pretty good too, not least because they actually did stuff and did it efficiently, relatively efficiently. I was able to get through those first 3 chapters quick enough to do them all in one morning, and with Wheel of Time, at least with Crossroads of Twilight, that got to be a little bit hard, so I'm hoping that Knife of Dreams as a whole reads a little bit quicker than the last couple books have, just as kind of its reputation has indicated. But I have spent just about 6 hours reading for this first week's worth of the book, which is a little bit less than I've been averaging. Like I said, I'm probably going to be splitting this up into a couple more diaries than the last couple books have had, just because of its length and because of some logistical time-based reasons. And the prologue of those nearly 6 hours that I spent reading for this week's diary, nearly 4 hours of that were just the prologue. So that is how long the prologue was. I thought that the content was good that I have read so far. Definitely a little bit more active than Crossroads of Twilight was. But yeah, that's basically all that I think I really need to or can say for the moment for spoiler-free impressions. So we'll go ahead and start talking about the spoilers at this point. The prologue is going to be very long to get through. Hopefully the first 3 chapters don't take that long, but knowing the way that I ramble in these videos, it's probably going to take a while, so my apologies. So to start off the prologue, I'm going to go ahead and cover all of the scenes within it that do not actually pertain directly to the White Tower storyline. So there's, I think, 4 scenes in here that go on with that content, so we'll go ahead and just cover all of that to start. The first 3 scenes are 3 of those scenes. The very first scene features Galad challenging Valda to a duel and winning, so some political stuff going on with the White Cloaks that I definitely wasn't expecting to happen. Within the scene, many White Cloaks express kind of being okay with Aes Sedai and Ashaman as long as they're joining up with them against the Shan-Chan or fighting with them at the last battle. There's a lot of just general political stuff going on within the scene, and you get these broader sentiments amongst some of the other White Cloaks that maybe it's okay to work alongside people who channel if we're fighting against a bigger threat like the Shan-Chan or the Dark One himself. So definitely some things changing with the White Cloaks and political structure following Niall's assassination a couple books back, and some of the others upheaval that just happened here with Galad defeating Valda in a duel, for example. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the White Cloak storyline actually has to offer, although I have heard pretty mixed sentiment about characters like Galad and whatever his half-brother's name is. So I'm not going to get my hopes too far up, but I'm looking forward to seeing what some of the political implications of this are. The second scene is Iturralde again, which I'm pretty sure the last time we saw Iturralde was in the prologue of Crossroads of Twilight, which was a really good scene, actually. This continues along that storyline with Iturralde actually now leading a massive campaign in Terrebonne alongside a bunch of Terrebonners disguised as Shan-Chan in order to cause some very stark political upheaval amongst the Shan-Chan in Terrebonne, and kind of the implications of that. In the prologue of Crossroads of Twilight, we saw this character kind of trying to get an agreement with many of the people at whatever the place is. Is it Damon's Head? Ered Damon? Yeah, Ered Damon, getting some of these people to agree to try to fight against the Shan-Chan because it was a little bit more important than some of the internal political strife that's been going on in that area. This prologue features a scene that's kind of paying off a little bit against that, and we see that it is largely successful, and the scene is followed up by a Shan-Chan POV, High Lady Suroth herself, who is in anguish about trying to locate Tuon, because, of course, at the end of, what was it, Winter's Heart, Matt kidnapped Tuon, and in Crossroads of Twilight, keeping her a little bit under wraps, and the Shan-Chan need to locate her because she is the daughter of the Nine Moons, a very important political figure here. Suroth also has made a couple other people, including Leandrin, Dakavale, so very specific type of servant, Leandrin being one of those Black Aja Aes Sedai, if I'm not mistaken at this point. Suroth also, in this scene, appears to be sided pretty directly with Semirej, who has apparently killed the entire royal family back home. That's what Semiraj says she has done anyway to Suroth, and promises to find and kill Tuon so that Suroth herself can become the Empress. So some pretty massive implications politically with the Shanchan. And again, this is another one of those types of things that, like, I was not expecting anything like this to come about, and definitely leaves some big question marks with regard to the purported invitation to Rand al'Thor. And in the prologue, or sorry, the epilogue of, was it Crossroads of Twilight, where Rand had asked, what's his name? Bashir and Loyal, I believe, to get an alliance kind of rolling, get some things started along those lines with the Shanchan, because Rand is determined that fighting the Dark One at the last battle is a little bit more important than fighting the Shanchan, and because he knows that he can't fight both fronts of this war at the same time. So seeing this scene occur with Suroth in the prologue of this book definitely has some major, like, flipping the table over, flipping everything on its head implications for what that meeting, that potential meeting with Rand, is going to entail. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens there in this book, if anything with that happens in this book. I anticipate the pace to be a little bit, up in Knife of Dreams, just based off of the reputation of the book. But like I said, wasn't expecting anything like that. That was pretty crazy. And then the other scene that does not have to do with White Tower or Egwene POV type of stuff occurs a little bit later, closer to the end of the prologue, actually. And that is Galena down by... Man, what's the town even called? I forget what the town's called, but it's the place where Zareen and everybody else is captured by the Aiel at the moment, that Perrin is trying to break into and free and rescue all of them from. So we switch to a Galena POV where she rides about for as long as she can, as free as she can, until she needs to return to, what's her bucket? The Rava, for something that she has to do in the evening. In the scene, Gaul and Naald happen to be about, and they actually end up kidnapping Galena and taking her back to their camp so that Perrin can speak with her, because they anticipate that, Galena's in white, and, we need to locate some of these people for Perrin, but there's a lot of these people, and because this guy Shane is Aes Sedai, or very clearly Aes Sedai, she probably has information that could be useful to Perrin. So they kidnap her and take her to Perrin. And Perrin basically demands to know where Zareen and everybody is at. Galena, kind of tries to weasel her way out of giving as much information as she can. She does trick Perrin with a sort of promise that, the book just straight up outright says she lies, saying that Perrin plans to apparently infiltrate via traveling to a very specific location within the camp, and Galena gives a promise to him that she will tell Zareen and the others to meet up at that location where Perrin wants at a specific time, like when some of the wolves start howling, so presumably when some sort of, a very obvious call sign is given out. Some of this experience kind of rattles Galena just a little bit. Like I said, she does trick Perrin into saying that she'll make that promise. She makes that promise that she'll tell Zareen all of this, even though she clearly doesn't have the intention to do so. And Galena is forced to go back to Tharava a little bit late, tries to have herself slapped to have some kind of excuse for Tharava about why it was that she was late, because Tharava is very particular about her orders for Galena and the Gaishin, kind of generally speaking. And obviously this kidnapping kind of imposes on that with Galena, but it is what it is. Galena does have a lot of her own nefarious personal goals going on here. She's trying to get the Oath Rod. Thank you, Jarek, for clarifying some of that for me in one of the previous diaries about what was going on, what it was that Galena needs, Zareen and Morghese and Aliendre to obtain for her, or what she's essentially blackmailed them into obtaining for her. Galena needs that Oath Rod and she plans to make a break for it at some point once she actually gets that, and she needs them to actually obtain it. At least that's my understanding of what's going on there. But that is all of the prologue scenes that don't really have to do with the White Tower type of stuff. So we'll go ahead and talk about the White Tower POV stuff like that going on. There's quite a bit here to get through, so I'm still going to try to get through this as quick as I can, but there was actually a lot of material in this prologue. It is a lot. Speaking of Galena, in Galena's absence, there has now had to be a highest seat raised in the Red Aja, since Galena's kind of been missing for a little while, so the Red Aja has had to pick somebody else to be the highest of the Aja, and some Aes Sedai named Sutama is the woman who has been raised to this position. I doubt that this person's going to be like that insanely important to the plot of the story. We'll see, but we just know that there's been a new highest raised in the Red Aja, which actually relieves other characters like Pavara. Sutama is having a meeting with Pavara and another sitter named Javindra, who I don't remember at all. No idea if she's important. But Pavara is pretty relieved by the fact that the Aja now has a new head, because she was aware of the fact that Galena was actually secretly Black Aja. So she's pretty relieved that there is a new highest here, which is, good news for the tower in that respect. Sutama has apparently learned a good bit about Dumai's whales and everything bad that happened regarding that whole situation several books ago, and has also gotten a little bit of information from like Sashel from all the way in Carrion, who apparently has some sort of leading role, some sort of control over all the Aes Sedai in Carrion. Apparently the Aes Sedai are being reported as being markedly, surprisingly friendly with the Ashaman in Carrion, although Sashel, who's reporting this information from the location, seems pretty naive to the fact that there's any bonding or any other funny business like that going on with the Ashaman there. It has been reported that Loghain has been healed, so clearly the White Tower kind of now knows that it is possible to heal people from being separated from the one power, and the Red Aja makes Sutama basically gives Pavara and them approval to go on with their plan to bond Ashaman against Elida's knowledge, like without informing Elida, the Amerlin seat, because they see this as Red Aja business specific, and because Elida is now the Amerlin and not specifically Red Aja, she doesn't need to be informed of this as Aja business until at some point later. So that is what happened in that scene. We have some of the big major moments of several books ago within the series being revealed to the White Tower, because up to this point the White Tower has been surprisingly unaware of a lot of the stuff that's been going on here. So that is all important information. Right after this, Pavara leaves and meets up with Yukiri again. They discuss some of the standstill that they've been faced with regard to kind of locating and bringing out a bit of the Black Aja, bringing them to heel, so to speak. Apparently, Taeline, one of the Black Aja, has been summoned to meet with like a council of the Black Aja themselves, and so Pavara and Yukiri and some of the others have had her like purportedly leave the White Tower ahead of that meeting supposed to happen, when in fact she's just been kind of like locked up basically deep in the depths of the White Tower, way down into the basement, so that she can't go to that meeting, because again she has been summoned specifically, so they're kind of worried about that. Apparently Siain, another one of the Aes Sedai who's kind of in on this, trying to rat out the Black Aja here. Siain has been ordered by Elida. I think I'm understanding this incorrectly, so somebody clarify. Siain has apparently been ordered by Elida to find proof of Alviarin corresponding with Rand. Am I understanding that right? Is that the order that she was given? I didn't quite understand that all the way, but considering that Elida seemed to be suggesting for a long time that Alviarin was maybe / probably Black Aja, if nothing else, certainly a traitor, why is she worried about this with regard to Rand all of a sudden? Like I said, I'm probably misunderstanding something about that, but that is kind of what I understood about this scene. Anyway, the next scene sees us taking Alviarin's POV, being spurned and judged quite a bit within the White Tower, being judged specifically by her Aja, which I believe is the Grey Aja off the top of my head, for being demoted from being the Keeper of the Stole, because she's no longer the Keeper anymore. She was taken out of that position in the last book. Was that in Crossroads of Twilight, or was that Winter's Heart? I forget. So little happened, and so little tangibly happened in Crossroads of Twilight. I forget if that happened in the last book. She does get word. Alviarin hears word about Taeline having supposedly left the White Tower, a few days before the meeting, the so-called the council meeting that we just heard about with the Blacks, was able to occur, and Taeline is ordered to be found by Alviarin. Like, she has some of her other correspondence, like, she needs to be found. This is something that needs to happen. And Alviarin is also still quite anxious about all of this stuff with the Dark One, because she's been marked by the Dark One. There are various moments of her, like, touching her forehead, observing her forehead in, like, mirrors and stuff like that, to make sure there isn't some mark there that's going to, like, give her away or anything like that, which is quite fun. But then the next two POV, or rather the next last POV, I guess, of the prologue is Egwene herself. I wasn't expecting Egwene to be within the prologue specifically, but we do get to see a little bit more of finishing what that final scene of Crossroads of Twilight was, where Egwene is now transported by various bickering sisters of the White Tower to the tower itself, where it is assumed by basically all those sisters that Egwene's probably going to be stilled and or killed for pretending to be the Amyrlin seat. They expect Elaida to kind of get on top of this within the next day or two. However, upon arriving to the White Tower, they do find that Nicola is there, and Nicola had tried to was it run away? Did she run away in the last book? I believe she had run away to the White Tower, hoping/assuming that the White Tower would help her do some of the stuff that she wanted to do, learning a little bit more quickly. I kind of doubt that that's something that girl's going to experience a bit. But either way, Nicola is there, and she is carrying with her Elaida's orders to actually take Egwene to Silviana, who is, what is the actual title? Like the Mistress of Novices or something like that. She's the one that takes care of novices and like dealing with punishments and penances and stuff like that. It is learned at the same time also that Leanne is in the tower cells. We also learned throughout some of the conversation that's going on here that is something. Leanne had apparently gone kind of undercover trying to essentially, I believe the intent was to turn a good bit of like some of the gate systems with the rivers leading into Tarvalon into like Quendalar to make them kind of dysfunctional, and so stop any further, basically improve the siege that's going on with the White Tower. At least that's as far as my understanding with that goes. So yeah, we learn that Leanne is in the prison, in the cells of the tower, and that Egwene, instead of being taken to the prisons directly, or instead of being taken to Elaida, is going to be taken to Silviana. Upon seeing Silviana, Egwene basically kind of refuses to back down from her role and title. She refuses to say that she's not the Amyrlin seat. She refuses to go along with some of these orders, where here in the White Tower proper, she has technically been not just removed from Amyrlin, because of course the White Tower doesn't ever observe that she ever was, but because of reasons that we don't understand at this point in time within the book, within the prologue, that Elaida has decided that Egwene is okay to keep alive, that it's in the Tower's best interest to keep her alive, probably for reasons like discovering some pretty unique magic and other weaves and stuff like that going on. She has her uses, so Elaida doesn't want to just straight up kill her. In either case, Egwene is like kind of stripped down to go become a novice again, not just go down to accepted, but to become a novice again, and like that's kind of basically her punishment going on. But Egwene refuses to accept that that's the case. She kind of still implicitly suggests that she is the Amyrlin seat. She also reveals that she is a dreamer, the first dreamer to happen in the world for a very long time, and so her punishment, as far as like being able to exist in the tower, quote unquote, unimpeded, is that she's going to be given little doses of fork root periodically throughout the day each day, so that she can still do things within the tower without having enough power to completely overcome anybody, and that she's going to be watched and shielded overnight every night because enough fork root to, make her go unconscious for an entire night would make her useless the next day. So this is kind of the punishments that Sylviana is come up with in order to deal with Egwene here. But Egwene kind of sees all of this situation going on with herself as an opportunity to essentially, in some sense, subversively bring the fight to the White Tower directly without having actually infiltrated the tower per se. And since she is here, when she is taken to her bed for the night in this scene, she does wait to meet up with Swan about how to handle the leadership back at the rebel camp in the meantime while she is, being watched and overseen in the White Tower. And that takes us into Chapter 1, which is actually a Swan POV following, awakening after that meeting with Egwene, within Tel'aran'rhiod, of course. But the excuse is that Egwene speaks to Swan in her dreams because the rebel hall, doesn't want Swan being able to get into Tel'aran'rhiod. If they knew that she had a ring, had a ter'angreal to help her actually enter Tel'aran'rhiod, they probably wouldn't allow her to keep it. But in either case, Chapter 1 opens following a meeting that Swan has had with Egwene, and she takes news that Egwene is alive and being kept in the White Tower to people like Sheriam, Egwene's Keeper of the Stole, and Myrell, and a couple of the other Aes Sedai as well. She also tells the news that Leanne is there and is a prisoner of the White Tower. But she also reveals that Egwene has given orders that no rescue attempts specifically for Egwene are to be made in the meantime, because she believes that she might be able to work some things to the rebels' favor, essentially their advantage, from within the tower. I'm not entirely sure what Egwene's plan is, but that is something she's pretty convinced of. She does not want to be taken out. Yeah, that is something that we learn. Anyway, Lelaine also comes and kind of interrupts the scene a little bit, requests a private meeting with Swan. She reveals that she knows from, having done some questioning of, Faolain, and maybe a couple others as well, that some of the internal political commitments of some of the Aes Sedai to Egwene specifically having sworn. Maybe she knows that some people have sworn fealty to Egwene specifically. I don't know if that specifically is the case, but she certainly knows that there is some weird political dynamics going on with regard to some of the Aes Sedai with Egwene. She reveals that she knows this because of little bits and pieces that Faolain has told her. And she also reveals to Swan that she is vying for the Amyrlin seat, so that if anything happens to Egwene, if she dies, or if something happens to her in the tower or whatever, that Lelaine expects for Swan to, help when/if that happens, to be raised to Amyrlin's seat herself. So Swan had been wondering for a little bit in the chapter if there was any Blue Aja or anything like that who would have a reason to do to betray Egwene, because of course Egwene was betrayed. That's the reason why the White Tower was able to capture her. And Lelaine, vying for the Amyrlin seat, suddenly has Swan worried about that. She knows, okay, well, now I know somebody might have a reason to try to do something against Egwene. So that's kind of a problem. Okay, moving into Chapter 2, we have a couple more White Tower specific POVs, technically the first POV isn't White Tower specific, because it is Aes Sedai named Bayanin, who awakes within the rebel Aes Sedai camp and notices through the day, some extra evidence of the Dark One's touch upon the world, such as the spoiling of food, other stuff like this. Later seeing some dead people when she does a little bit of traveling elsewhere, which we'll get to in just a bit. So apparently it is definitely pretty imminent that the Dark One's touch is actually affecting the world actively. Of course, with these last 3 books over here, I know we're leading up to the last battle. We're kind of setting up the stage for the very last act of the series at this point, so it makes sense that characters are kind of acknowledging this a little bit more directly rather than saying it's going to happen soon. It's actually happening now, basically. So that's something interesting to note. But Bayanin awakes. She is asked by some of the other Aes Sedai about some of the deaths of a couple of the Aes Sedai that were done by the hands of male channelers by the use of Sidin. She encourages basically searching for connections that relate some of the deaths together, such as both of the Aes Sedai who have been killed by presumably Arengar. Both of the Aes Sedai that died to this were Blue Aja, and so Bayanin kind of makes a connection. It's like, well, maybe something to do with Rand has to do with this, and therefore maybe it's the Ashaman that have done this. Or if nothing else, the Ashaman might know who did this or figure out how to do this. But of course, there's a little bit more to note with the fact that the Hall is not really agreed on a way to handle trying to make an alliance with Ashaman to any degree, so this is all just kind of like political background stuff going on. The real key point of the scene of this Bayanin POV is that she and her warder actually travel real quick over to Tarvalon, and Tarvalon is where Bayanin witnesses a dead person in the street, which kind of disconcerts her a good little bit. The warder believes that she is intending to assassinate Elaida because she intends to go into the White Tower alone, and Bayanin disguises herself to allow herself to be able to get into the tower without perhaps most people recognizing who she is directly, but she does not allow her warder to come with her. Actually has her warder go like get an inn somewhere in the city. That is where we get a shift over to Elaida's POV, where she's basically having some kind of discussion of sorts with a former king of Ilion, who apparently she had kidnapped kind of as a means to showcase her power, that she has the ability to do this as like a show of the White Tower's power, I guess, probably more specific. She makes the promise to return this king of Ilion to the throne of Ilion as a show of the Tower's power as well. This is something that's happening at the beginning of her POV, but some of the other, a little bit more, again, political background stuff of Tarvalon that we get revealed within Elaida's POV here is that Tarvalon has not done a very good job of carrying out some of her orders to see like the city cleaned up a little bit. Of course, it is noticed that the city is a little bit in disrepair, but apparently some of that is because a lot of the people who live within the city haven't been going out and doing some of their jobs or have been following some of the orders that they've been given, because they've also been seeing dead people within the streets. So that's, again, a little bit disconcerting. We see that Bayanin seeing a dead person wasn't a unique thing, at least in the context of Tarvalon. There are other people who are seeing this as well. Elaida does command her keeper of the Chronicle, or whatever everything's called. She does command Tarna to make sure that things do get done, even if that means dragging people out of their houses to go clean the streets or whatever. In the midst of some of the stuff that is going on, Bayanin is allowed actually to come in and petition Elaida as her disguise, but it turns out she reveals herself when she is actually meeting with Elaida specifically, saying that she has learned a lot of weaves, a lot of new weaves among the rebels. Things such as traveling and skimming showcases some of this for Elaida a bit directly, and Elaida commands Bayanin to not teach anybody how to do any of these weaves unless Elaida gives direct permission for it, which is a little bit of a strange command, but definitely an interesting one at the same time. We understand that Elaida has reasons to withhold some of this because there are people within the White Tower, she has learned, that are not fully on her side, and so she doesn't want any of those people to have some of this knowledge. And she also knows that some of the Ajas are kind of starting to get at each other's throats a little bit. This is a big political point that was made throughout the early portions of this book that I haven't even touched on at this point, is just that a lot of the Ajas are like starting to kind of get at each other, specifically within the White Tower, and Elaida doesn't want, some of these women, some of these Ajas, to probably get some of this information to learn some of these weaves, if there's a chance that they'll fall away from the tower or try to, fight back or something along these lines, is my guess anyway. But Bayanin also reveals as well that there are specifically some rebel Aes Sedai infiltrators. There are people within the White Tower who came from Saladar back when they were still over in Saladar, which includes Miadani, who in the last book, I believe, was actively trying to reacquaint herself to become friends of sorts again with Elaida. And now that Elaida knows that this is because Maidani is, well, part of the Rebel Aes Sedai, she intends to actually meet with her now, and probably something bad will come out of that. But that is some of the stuff that happens in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 gives us an Arengar POV, so a meeting of the Forsaken. Arengar meets with some of the other Forsaken in Tel'aran'rhiod upon Moradin's summoning, because Moradin has apparently summoned them all together. Arengar is accused by a couple of the others, I believe by like Demandred specifically, of having lost her grip on Egwene. The fact that Egwene is now stuck in the White Tower is apparently a bad thing for the Forsaken. They need the tower to remain split a little bit more. They want a little bit more of that chaos going on. And so the fact that Egwene is now kind of like within the White Tower suggests that there might be maybe not clean per se, but a higher chance of like the Rebel Aes Sedai camp being destroyed or folding into the tower, or some other stuff along these lines that might work against some of the Forsaken's plans, whatever those may be. So she gets accused of some of this stuff. Moradin does eventually arrive with Moghedien and Sindain with news that a Forsaken, maybe Samael, has been sending Trollocs and Fades into the Waygates, into the Ways, and demands that none of the Forsaken that are gathered here do that, and that none of them act alone doing anything without express knowledge or permission of sorts from the Dark One or Moradin specifically, depending on how you interpret that. And Moradin also tells all of these people to look for the Dark One's prison seals that Rand maybe doesn't have directly in his possession, but they do tell them to go to places where Rand has been known to go to look for some of the Dark One seals, because they need those. They need to break those so that the Dark One can break free. So there's definitely some plans that are going on along those lines. And Sindain also at the very end suggests wanting to kidnap Rand, which leaves Arengar to believe pretty starkly that Sindain is just Lanfear, which I'm pretty sure is in fact the case. And Moradin doesn't want to do that because she's worried that Sindain would end up killing Rand for whatever reason. And Moradin also says that he will decide when Rand's death happens, and so he doesn't insist on Rand being captured specifically at this point. Instead, he tells all the other Forsaken to find and kill Mat and Perrin, and that is the goal that they've been given. But that is like the last thing that happens in Chapter 3. That is all of everything from the prologue and the first few chapters. I did get through that a little bit quicker than I anticipated, which is nice. It was all good material. I've enjoyed the book up to this point, at least in the hardcover version. I have read like 130 pages out of just over 700, so like it doesn't feel like I've read that much, but at the same time it does feel like I've read quite a bit, largely because there's actually been a lot more content to really think about within each chapter. Even with some of the extraneous information, a little bit more of it feels actively relevant, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I'm going to be working over the course of this next week or so at the time of recording to read a pretty hefty chunk of the book. Honestly, probably like a couple hundred pages if I were to take a random guess, maybe a little bit more than that, so that I can record episodes 2 and 3 of Wheel of Time Diaries for A Knife of Dreams at the same time before I go on my North Carolina trip. Otherwise, episode 3 would not be able to happen on time. It definitely wouldn't be able to release on time because that would be, well, I'm not expecting to be able to read anything over my trip. I probably will, but I'm not expecting for it to, so that I'm not like getting behind on work or missing video deadlines or something like that as a result. So in either case, I'm not sure how much further I'm going to be for next diary. I believe it'll probably be up to chapter 11 or up to chapter 13 or something, probably somewhere in that range for diary number 2. But again, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. I'm just going to read as much as I can over the next several days of Knife of Dreams, and then make a decision on where I'm going to make those next couple diaries, what content is going to be included in each of them a little bit later. Maybe this means that the diaries for Knife of Dreams are a little bit shorter again, because yeah, all of these diaries have been really, really long for a really long time at this point. But yeah, that is the end of the first episode for Knife of Dreams. Thank you for checking out this video if you did. Sorry about my phone falling over there, I apologize. I appreciate you watching if you did, and I look forward to seeing you guys back for the rest of the episodes for A Knife of Dreams if possible, or if you're interested in doing that, it would mean a lot to me. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure what the actual video schedule looks like with regard to these diaries from now through the end of the year. I'm just kind of playing things by ear based off of how much of the book I'm able to read, and also with how much time I'm able to actually spend making diaries for them before I go on my North Carolina trip, because that is the real deciding factor on very many different things that I've got going on this month. So yeah, that is what I've got going on. Thank you for watching this video one final time if you did. For now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next diary, which will definitely still be happening next week.